seems that I am an Heyoka, or contrarian, or person who does things backwards, since seeing the Mothman. I thought I would plug the CD here that started this process off. Most people start with a book and then they do a film, and then there's a soundtrack made of the film. Well, we're doing it backwards, starting off with the Ivy League Power Dump CD, Songs for Abductees, ... The cover art is by Jim Woodring, who we're going to meet here in a minute. The back has a nice shot of doctors working on an alien body. Next we have the CD soundtrack to the film that you are watching now. We've got some cover art there. That's a photo that I took in New York City just a few days before September 11th, in fact. And I remember walking across the bridge there and thinking, you know, I really need to take a shot of the Twin Towers. And I sort of shot it as if the Twin Towers are trapped behind bars. Perhaps even then, before the event, I was already at some level aware of that maybe the time that this precognition's time had come. Another thing I wanted to point out here, little tidbit, is I was just reading in the literature for the Heyokas, and found that they are known to put pig's bladders over their heads to make themselves look bald, and then they might stick some scraggly hairs in there. Well, it just so happens I have carried this mask around for 25 years probably, and it is absolutely something I've cherished and I will wear on Halloween, and I sort of become my alter ego, Scabby Plooney, when I wear that. But that's typical Heyoka behavior, totally unconscious until now. The other thing I wanted to talk about was this strange story that I just heard. I got it from Infowars.com. It's run by a fellow named Alex Jones in Austin, Texas. We're going to be meeting some people from Austin soon in this series. It's an interesting place. It's full of people, contactees. It's full of conspiracy theorists, and Alex is one of these. He seems to be focused on the 911 event as being an inside job, and has several videos and things to explain his position. But this story here is a Mothman story. I was just leafing through his site, and I see an article about the Bohemian Grove, which is a place where wealthy folks like Kissinger was one of the people that was always, well known. It was well known that he went there every year. It's sort of an annual Burning Man for Republicans. They do rituals sort of in the style of the Skull and Bones fraternity that the Bushes were raised in there at Yale. A lot of people have written about it as having these Masonic connections having to do with power and occult workings, using the occult to sort of guide national policy. In this story, it says that they've been holding this meeting for 130 years in Northern California, and I guess someone snuck in there with a camera and filmed their big ceremony that they do every year. They're all like in black capes or red capes. What they do at this particular ritual every year is that they sacrifice a human being in effigy, meaning they have a dummy of a person who looks like a real person, and then he is sacrificed. And here's the interesting part. This person is sacrificed, this effigy is sacrificed in front of a giant stone owl. Now, it's not a big leap to consider the fact that an owl might be a representation of the Mothman. There were a whole series of sightings that were similar to Mothman stories that were called the Owlman phenomenon. People were seeing this Owlman, basically the same idea, a half bird, half man seemingly other dimensional being. So it makes me wonder if perhaps the great power brokers of our country are not actually worshiping Mothman, unbeknownst to all the rest of us. And here's a really crazy idea. What if the connection with this precognition of 911 that myself and others have had, what if that is some sort of leakage from the fact that, assuming that Alex's crazy theory, which is that 911 was a Masonic ritual itself, with symbologies happening in it that the Masons, or people like the Masons, are always accused of. Well, if that is a true story, then that might explain why so many people got wind of this event precognitively. If they were in contact with the Mothman, if a person like myself saw the Mothman, well, maybe via that connection, I was able to connect with the other people who worship Mothman and who may or may not have been involved in certain great events like 911. It's pretty out there, but that's what we do here. We go out there. By the way, I do not worship Mothman. I just think he's a great protector. My next guest is the author of this book. His name is Jim Woodring. I've been friends with Jim for a long time. This book is a compilation of his Frank comics. The interesting thing about Jim's work is that he doesn't use words in his cartoons. They're pretty much like dreams. They have that kind of flow to them. They shift from scene to scene, and you come away with an unconscious understanding of whatever it is Jim is putting forth in a particular segment. Jim would be the first person to tell you that he has had visions, apparitions, and various kinds of pseudo-hallucinations for his entire life. I happen to think that he is part of this phenomenon, or he is in contact with this phenomenon. In fact, he still has occasional visits from apparitions, and one of the interesting ones that he had recently was he was at Northgate Mall, where it just so happens I've been interviewing people. He was in the parking lot there and turned and saw someone saying his name who had the head of some sort of weird apparition. The head looked like a rotten vegetable or something. And this has clued us into the fact that Northgate Mall may indeed be a window area. Some of Jim's drawings remind me very much of my own dreams, dreams that I've had that seem connected to this phenomenon. For instance, here on page 89 of his book, here we see a shadow being that is a winged shadow being. This sort of would remind you of a Mothman. And here it sort of transmutes down into a devilish, demonic sort of figure. And then it transforms into the stick figure, which is a main part of my dreams. I often dream of the stick figure. Jim's work is replete with various hallucinatory events. In a manner not unlike my 911 precognition, Jim and his wife Mary both had events happen that seemed to point toward some sort of precognition of that event. In Jim's case, it was that he did a drawing right before the event that actually was withdrawn from publication on September 11th, and we'll show that coming up. Before that, Mary is going to talk about a dream she had the night before, or I think maybe 2 nights before.
I dreamed that I was out in the middle of the ocean and I was in a tower with a glass roof, and we found that there was a tidal wave coming, and there was nothing that anybody could do to stop it. And so I had a terrible sense of resignation that there was nothing I could do. And that's it. Tower out in the middle of the ocean.
Her husband Jim drew this drawing 2 days before. Is that right?
It was,
Yes, 2 days before.
It was going to run in the Stranger.
And it was going to run in the Stranger. It was all set to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then September 11th occurred, and it was withdrawn.
Yeah, we called and we said you can't run it.
Okay. So you took it off voluntarily?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I think it was the morning that it happened was like the last chance we had to change it. And before September 11th, we were laughing our head off at that picture. We thought it was the funniest thing. And then it just it didn't seem so funny after that. Oh, that's good.
Right here. Oh, there's crash. Here's one that you did. So on your drawing that was two days before September 11th.
No, I was just drawing pictures for just to have them and sell them, and that was an idea I'd had kicking around in my mind for a while. So I finally got around to doing it, and it just happened to be a couple days before the attacks.
Earlier today, we were talking about all the synchronicities that occur, and how it's easy to get sidetracked by some of those phenomena, which are there to sort of tantalize us. And Jim was saying that he was, as a traditional seeker, has sort of taken the traditional approach of not paying attention to those. So
Yeah.
I think I said it.
I should make it clear that I've never had any occult powers or spectacular spiritual experiences to be discriminate with. It's just an attitude.
Although in your book it says that there's reference to things that you had seen as a child. Do you think that these perhaps were window events that opened up your creativity or sort of set you on a path?
Well, I do think that some of the things I saw, which had kind of a brutally infantile quality to them, were maybe distilled visions of something I was experiencing, something we all experience when we're very, very young because we're still very close to the source of our life. And I think that, like a lot of people have an impression of tubes and tunnels and eyes and corridors and strange silent places and all of those things that so many people associate with nostalgia for the infinite, as they say. So, I think that whatever it is I saw when I was a kid was either that real experience when I was young or an attempt to keep it alive later on, sort of a flashback, if you will, an echo of that event that would play itself over something else. You know what I mean? So I think that what I'm saying is that I think a lot of those things, I think that at the beginning it's a progression. At the beginning, those things I think could have been seeing something for real, and ever since that initial moment where they were unquestionably, unqualifiedly real, they've turned into sort of a memory reconstruction ever since. They've meant less and less, they've done less and less, they've occurred less and less frequently, and they've eventually been easy to give up.
But you were just the synchronicities. You still have those because you were saying earlier that you. I forget the situation, but you opened a book and it was exactly. Oh, it was with the Swami that you had gone to see.
Right.
And you had
that's
opened the book.
something where I wouldn't even want to be skeptical because it was so nice.
Do you think that those apparitions have sort of been replaced by these other things that are sort of little signposts for us that we're in the right place? Because when I described my situation with the freight train, someone said, "Hey, well, that just means you were exactly where you were meant to be at that moment. You you were in the center of your path.
Huh.
Because you got a synchronicity there to lay claim to sort of say, hey, the universe and I are ticking at the same vibrational rate in some way.
It seems like a pat on the back or a note of encouragement. Yeah, and that's the way I felt when I found that passage in that book.
But I asked you earlier, and I don't remember what you said, but it had to do with when you do one segment of, say, your Frank series, do you feel that you work through some unconscious? Do you learn something about your unconscious at the end of each one? Does something come to the conscious mind from the unconscious due to the fact that you...
I think those comics are born of a desire to take something which I can sense is buried in my consciousness and put it into a more concrete form so I can examine it and have fun with it. Since I started doing those comics, there have been a number of stories that I really felt I wanted to tell. And since then I feel like I've done pretty much all of them. There's a few more stories I have and that I would like to tell, but the ones I felt urgent about getting out are out. So, and I've changed so much in the way I feel about art and my relationship to it. I'm thinking I would like to find a way to do something dedicated to the same goal my art is dedicated to, but a more direct route. So maybe that would be art. I don't know. It would be something different, though. I mean, it wouldn't be art.
It would be more of a Buddhist path. It sounds like more.
Well, it would be more of a devotional path. A path really more seriously devoted to meditation and developing all the properties that they say you need to progress, in which I can certainly see. All of the 8 steps of yoga, all of the different qualifications that all seem like a wonderful way to live to me.
Jim and I were both chased by crows this year. Jim's excited about this tree. But I was talking to Jim about how in his new book there's a shadow being in one of the stories that reminded me of the shadow being I saw. And I was telling Jim about the Heyoka curse that I've been under, and he says that he got it from a drawing by a Russian named
Boris Artzybashev. That's Artzybashefm.
And he also had a drawing of a shadow bat being, and he's now saying that he's talking about the qualities of being bilateral. And then I don't know where we're at now in that argument, that debate.
It's an investigation, not an argument.
Right.
It's just the idea that bilateral shapes have a certain speaking power. Like the Rorschach blot. There's a reason that that's bilateral.
That's the same image that they had for the Mothman Prophecies movie. They had a bilateral ink blot.
That's an important thing. There's one of the things that that just tears my heart to pieces. But I get involved in it in some of those Frank stories, and it's the way you can start out radially symmetrical and acquire bisymmetry.
Oh.
It's a rough process.
Right.
It's like something has to be terribly destroyed, or in the best cases, mostly cut away. But there's a story where Manhog is ground down to what looks like a radially symmetrical stump of his former self, and he experiences unprecedented romantic success in a nearby stream. So this is not some crackpot theorizing. Look, a clown mobile. Now where are they going? They're like volunteer firemen out to put out a party or something. It's great.
Well, the bilateral thing reminds me of a concept that's I've been seeing lately, which has to do with the unification of the left and right brains. They find that in the energy system, the Advaita Vedanta energy system. They have a whole series of workshops on how to link your left and right hemispheres. And that seems like that would be a form of bilateralism.
Well, I can reference my own work in reciprocal. Something seems to be standing on my tongue. I was going to say I can reference my own work in reciprocal brain looting, for which I invented the lootie, an assemblage of mirrors which enables your eyes to look directly into each other. But it feels as if, well, it's hard to describe. It feels as if you've got two 9-volt batteries and you've clipped them together and they're just draining the power out of each other. It gives you a very unpleasant, sleepy sensation, kind of knocks you out, lowers your receptibility, I think, to the world as it was. Wow. Terrible thing to do at a party, but definitely has an effect and may be addictive.
Wow. So are you saying that the bilateralism might be more akin to that kind of a negative charge or something?
What I'm saying is that as a serious cartoonist, I found that I had to conduct legitimate laboratory experiments in order to verify what I thought I was saying in one of my plot lines, which is the story in which this character Whim takes his own version of the lootie, which is called the Whim Grinder, and is much more dynamic, and deliberately performs aggressive acts of reciprocal brain looting on some of the characters in Frank's world. Because by further dividing their brains, see, everybody wants to join them. Nobody thinks about dividing them further in a non-medical way. I've always said, if there's a fad, go in the opposite direction. That's where the pendulum's going to come next. And,
so does bilateralism describe one of those two?
Bilateralism is a relative. See, if you can transfer, if something is bilateral, can be either a piece of something that is radially symmetrical or can become radially symmetrical, then it's not a stage. Any case of it is just a stage in a transformation. So it's completely relative, and you can have shapes which are perfectly balanced between radially and bilaterally symmetrical.
Okay.
Which is to say that they're cruciform shaped. So they have to become more complex before they can become simplified. They have to addition and then division.
I find it interesting that within a few days of showing Jim Woodring my pictures of home, that he has this image in The Stranger, and the title is "Come Back to Tour Dilapidated Home in the Hills." Next we have a fellow Heyoka, Bill Bryant, from Austin, Texas. Bill is the architect to the stars, an architectural prodigy whose Heyoka behavior sets him apart from the others in Austin. Some people can't quite understand his approach, but it's respected nonetheless. He is a visionary, a traveler, a solo journeyer, communer with nature. Bill's first project after leaving college won the New York State Home of the Year award. Bill happens to have seen a shadow being just like mine, and also shares a lot of similarities in terms of our background and upbringing and interests. I would say that Bill is a psychic twin of mine. Bill tells me that he once did a drawing that looked a lot like Mothman, and he still has this. He's carried this drawing with him everywhere since. He's the kind of person that has very little belongings. He likes to travel light. So it's interesting that this particular drawing is one that he has held on to, and at some point in the series we'll get a copy of that. Bill and I met at the Tulalip Indian Reservation in August of 2003, where we witnessed a huge event in Native culture, which is the first time ever that all of the tribes on the West Coast have paddled and on boats to a predetermined spot to have a big powwow. As soon as we arrived at the powwow, we were given energy treatments by the native healers and were invited to come back later to learn their methods. It seems as if Bill has some of the same healing abilities as others in this series like Harriet, Kenny, and Mercedes. He also has psychic and precognitive abilities and utilizes imagery to integrate his experience.
Well, I don't know. I really hate positing anything because I don't think there's I don't have a desire to feel consistent or be consistent on any basis whatsoever.
That's cool.
Just kind of the freedom to be in the moment and just be with what's going on now, and all of my opportunities of glimpsing into the kind of an atemporal world came from usually after long periods of sabbaticals of allowing myself just to just be at peace and be at ease. They really weren't trauma oriented; they were much more ease oriented, and that was, I guess, the opportunity to have a glimpse. And but then again, not to hold on to them. I guess I went through that in earlier parts of my life, to polish some understanding and to think this is that. But I don't know. I'm kind of a weaver. I like to weave fabrics and weave matrices of understanding and participate in each. Kind of draw the needle, take time sometimes to look back and see what's being woven. But even that's not too precious, and just let it go too and see what arrives next. And I think kind of the thing that always held me back in the past was always fear. I don't know. So I used to build altars to it, and anything I was afraid of, I would put in the altar. Some kind of effigy of whatever the area that I was afraid of. And anyway, my buddy Rick's back, and we're going to go see some Indians and pitch some tents.
What's up?
This is my buddy Rick, who I just met a little bit earlier. And he's eating a piece of really greasy fried chicken, and chances are his steering wheel will slip and spin later, and he'll shake hands with Indians, and they'll wonder why he's so greasy. But we call it white man's chicken.
Another thing that Bill was saying was that in the East, enlightenment comes after a long struggle. People spend years of at some arduous task to achieve enlightenment. But in the West, it's almost as if you can achieve enlightenment pretty quickly. Just that there's so much knowledge out there, you can get the knowledge of enlightenment really fast and easy. However, then you have to pay for the rest of your life after that. And what that said to me was that there's a similarity there with the Heyoka. The Heyoka has a vision, has a sense of enlightenment or a change of awareness from that experience. Perhaps has a spike in creative skills or intelligence, and possibly quickly has a grasp of what enlightenment is about, and then for the rest of their lives they struggle with, well, it wasn't made clear by Bill, just that there is a struggle, a payment, a debt to be paid. And I think it may have to do with the fact that the Heyoka, the sacred clown, sort of stands apart from the culture, especially if the culture doesn't recognize that role and give it proper handling. Bill is receiving energy healing. Here's how he does it. Back of a Toyota mini truck. Right here, he's got his bed up on a pedestal there. Sleeps with his head toward the open hatch. Leaves the hatch open. Got storage down here for all his stuff. Got the back gate open. Got his map. Just want to tell me about Panther. You know, I'm a Panther in Cherokee.
Panther Creek,
Cherokee
dude.
astrology. Anytime you see Panther Creek, Panther Mountain, hitting these Panther places, they're usually power spots.
Well, here it is, dude. Right there.
Bill is going to describe his experience at Panther Creek, Mount Rainier National Park, involving shadow beings.
Shit, crazy. I guess it was about 4 or 5 years ago. I was on Panther Creek on Mount Rainier.
1999.
Yeah, in Washington State. I'm not positive on the year, but about then. And I'd been at the end of about a 6-month sabbatical away from work. And Mount Rainier had always been one of my favorite places to go and to recreate. And so I went to one of my favorite waterfalls, kind of a hidden place that I've never seen anybody else at before, and had finished swimming and jumping off the cliffs into the cold water and feeling really quite at peace and really quite at ease. And at that point I had left my apartment in New York City and was for probably about like my number 5 sabbatical from the city. And
What do you mean you're number 5?
probably about the 5th time I'd taken a sabbatical out of New York.
You were an architect in New York
Mhm.
at the time?
Yeah. And running out of money and quite ready to re-enter the workplace, and wanted to know where I should go and what I should do because I had a lot of options open up to. And it was late in the day, and late in the day, the sun started going down, and I kind of didn't want to leave the waterfalls, but I hung out. But I also just, in that moment of just peacefulness, I said, look, I've chosen a life of service as a person anyway, and what do I do? And something inside of me said to look back up the hill, and then I turned back up the hill, and adjacent to these very old, very large growth old trees were shadow figures, dark figurines, several of them adjacent to trees, and there's just an incredible sense of peace and well-being, and it was just kind of go back to New York basically. And there was a reason why, that someone I knew very close to was dying, and that just to go and participate in his death, and just you're needed where love is needed, and that's where one goes. And so I at first just thought it was actually people standing next to the trees, and I kept looking closer and closer, and then I walked up and even looked around a little bit, and ones that I knew were adjacent to certain trees, I'd look again, they wouldn't be there. But then I'd look again towards another set of trees, and there would be there again, and then they were gone. But I always felt such a real sense of just peace and tranquility, and just kind of an assurance, a direction, that and an affirmation, I guess, of returning back to New York. And that was at Panther Creek on Mount Rainier.
When you first told me the story, you said that you mentioned that you started having precognitions, or you just felt like after that, if something bad was going to happen to somebody, you might get a feeling about it. Do you think it was connected with those beings at all?
You really could be. I think that's the only time that I really felt that I actually felt like I was seeing something. But I've always relied heavily on kind of precognition. Most of the times that's been the strongest is when I've finished a meditation retreat, or been in the middle of a meditation retreat, like a Vipassana retreat. That during those things, I don't know, psychically you just open up to some hidden, intense nadis, blocks. And for me, I tend to trying to marry the inside with the outside, and rely heavily on my intuition and precognitions, I guess.
Okay, here we are, southeast corner of Northgate Mall, August 8th? August 9th, 2003. I just got an email from Harriet yesterday. She has been remote viewing this area because I sent her an email telling her about not only the fact that Ben Camp and I filmed here because we felt like it was a special spot for some reason, and then I heard that Jim Woodring, I heard from Jim Woodring at one of his talks recently that he had a paranormal event happen when he was here at the mall. When I heard that, I contacted Harriet and I said, "Do you know anything about this mall? Can you just do a remote view on it?" And she goes, "Well," and I didn't tell her what part of the mall that we were drawn to. And she goes, "Well, it's the southeast corner. It has something to do with there's a big debate about something, perhaps a creek, perhaps a park. It might be a power spot." And I did a little research and I found that sure enough they're fighting over this. There's a creek that runs underground underneath the Northgate Mall. And there's been a lot of controversy ever since they paved it over. You know, the creek now runs through a conduit, and people are upset that, you know, its original banks were changed. And which makes you wonder. I mean, lots of malls are built around America, but there isn't controversy about the creek running there, you know, but for some reason there is with this one. And I contacted my friend Rick, who we saw the other day eating chicken in his truck, who's a friend of the Tulalip tribe, and he said that they're having the same issue up there with a mall that paved over a sacred creek, and he thinks that's probably what's going on here, is that it was a sacred creek to the Indians. And a lot of the malls, he said, are built on crossroads, ancient crossroads where trade was made, and then just the tradition sort of carried on and eventually became a mall. I thought I would bring Bill here on his last day in Seattle, and we're going to do a little investigating here in a few moments of the creek. In the meantime, though, I wanted you to discuss some of your personal sightings. You told us about one which had to do with Panther Creek and Mount Rainier Park, where you saw a shadow being and experienced some precognition related to that sighting, personal direction. But there was another one that you said where you had everything had sort of disappeared and you'd entered an alternate state or a heightened consciousness state. And then I think you said there were a couple of others that we haven't talked about. So I'll hand it over to you.
Well, I was in upstate New York on the Hudson River Valley. A good friend of mine owns a house up there. It sits on about 7 acres, adjacent to some wetlands and also a gigantic power line that runs through the property, right over the property, and then also a very large underground gas pipeline that cuts underneath the Hudson River there. And it was a summer morning. Sat outside on the parking area for the cars, and again, much like in New York, everything just disappeared. I mean, it's just kind of all electrical, just none of the surrounding aspects, the house, the yard, the river, everything just kind of disappeared. And in that case, it was just kind of a real blissful, peaceful moment. Kind of a real atemporal experience, and just outside of myself and outside of time, and that really didn't carry any visuals to it. It wasn't really a visual phenomenon. It was just I don't know. I tend to learn in episodes and chapters, and in my younger years, far more kind of histrionic than now. I guess also due in part to some of these experiences. And just kind of like everything's okay, you know, don't get caught up in the phenomenal world, don't get caught up in all this stuff. It's just relax and enjoy. And so it's kind of been an operation of modality for me in many years since then, of just not getting uptight about things and not being moved so much, but kind of like walking through a really crowded room and with a lot of noise and a lot of things going on, and just being able to peacefully walk right on through the middle of it all. And I think experiences like this have helped a lot, and just being at peace with things. And I guess fairly close in that time in New York City, I lived in the loft where they filmed the movie Ghost, and it had been filmed there a couple of years, about maybe a year or so before I moved in. And it was essentially a 4,800 square foot vacant loft in Soho. And again, it was a Saturday morning early, prior to going out to play basketball, before all the crowd showed up in the city. And in this case, the only furniture I had was 2 chairs and a table. I sat down at the chair and kicked my feet up on the table just to kind of relax a little bit before I went out to play. And at that time, again, the whole room just pretty much disappeared. And it was kind of a moving, migrating helix and bound upon these helix were different times in history. And they were all occurring simultaneously, everything from prehistoric times to the Roman Empire, the crucifixion of Christ, Nazi Germany, and even personal aspects and history of my own life were all in there, and they were all occurring simultaneously. And no matter what, if I wanted to go into a certain area and look into it, I could really just kind of like, wherever my mind wanted to go into, I could step into it and look. And it was very fascinating, but still there was just this kind of peacefulness, an easy air of being. And that lasted, I think, probably for, I don't know, maybe 10-15 minutes or something like that. I really don't know. And when it was all said and done, I had just such an amazing sense of gratitude, because it was kind of I think it's a gift, whether it's something that emanates out of all of us, that we do have that ability to live atemporally whenever we wish. I've never really had a desire to cultivate that, and didn't necessarily put too much stock into it either, too. But I do think over the course of time, several of these significant experiences of being able to glimpse into an alternative timescape has made an impact on my life, and has afforded me the opportunity, or just the insight, to be at peace with things, regardless of what's going on. I don't know that the world's really ever experienced a really peaceful, non-violent time, but I don't know, it's just putting the phenomenal world into to a bigger picture, into I guess a phenomenal world. Well, I've read history and studied zoology and physics and biology and architecture, and read countless books on and on and on and everything I could, and just the woven fabric of life. What is it all about? But I think, I don't know, in the last possibly 5 to 10 years, the need to know the overlapping, the matrix, and the undercurrents doesn't seem to be as important to me anymore. And now, I mean, I'm not surprised by much, and I really don't have a profound need to encapsulate and to label and stuff like that. And whatever arises at that moment, I try to just greet it with a little equanimity and just enjoy life. I mean, it's so incredibly rich. Just try to enjoy it. But to piece it together is not really my thing anymore, which is fine. I'm totally elated and really enjoy meeting people who do have a passion for that. And mine seems to be a lot more immediate now. And I think that has a lot to do with stepping in. I think when you are fairly immediate and you're not trying to rationalize or to understand anymore, there is this immediate understanding that does show up. There is a now. There is an amazing understanding in the now. And I don't know, I think that's that little edge there, that little brief edge, can allow you to slip over into, I guess, what from temporal to atemporal, not of time. And I think that could be really quite fascinating. Now, I wouldn't be surprised by much that shows up at this interface. And so I'm not prone to want to say things only because I don't feel a need to be consistent, because that requires dogmas and ideologies and encapsulation and holding things and labeling things, and I think that entails a lot of suffering and possibly a lot of ignorance. Well, you used the word last week for me that really stuck true to me when I got a chance to wander around in the Canadian Rockies for 4 or 5 days, was that you need to honor the skills, the understanding, the perception that we all have that are unique to ourselves and common to one another. And I found that to be, I don't know, very profound. It really stuck with me, and I appreciate that. And I think in light of that too, I'll probably carry that word, that little mantra of a word, for a while, because I think it is necessary to be respectful. I mean, I don't think human nature and humankind has changed that much. I think we are still as violent, and someone once said that all acts of ignorance are violent in nature. And I think that's probably true. So I don't know. I'm glad you have the energy and the desire to want to weave a really beautiful fabric that has motion and movement to it. I guess I'm probably kind of in the observer time of my life, which I think I've always done, but instead of trying to string things together, I think now I just notice it. But I think holographically they all take place at the same time anyway. So
it's interesting that you talk about this double helix, because particularly since you've already seen a shadow being, I would propose this theory at this moment, just from hearing your story about the double helix, that you actually saw another version of the Mothman. You were seeing another side of what they call a side of the Garuda. The Garuda is often depicted as holding two spirals, but they're snakes. They're called snakes, but it's been translated. That image of the Garuda holding the two snakes has been translated into things like the American Medical Association symbol. The two snakes that are going around the staff, and at the top of the staff there are wings, and those represent the Garuda. So all throughout history, the Garuda has been seen as this healer. Another interpretation that Kenny brought up was that the snake would bite Hippocrates on the shoulder, and meaning that Hippocrates would take on the illness and cure himself. And that's another angle that they come at with using that. I guess I'm offering a new or maybe older explanation for it.
I think there is Jesus used to say you need to marry heaven to earth, and I think there is a timeless. That's always the curious thing, how to be present here and on this earth and all the phenomena that's going on, all the things that are taking place, but to do it in such an authentic way where there is no self doing it. And because I think essentially our own consciousness is the same as all human consciousness. And I think when we make a change within our own lives, we're actually changing all of the consciousness of all of mankind. So I think it is. It's a curious question. How do we spend our time when we're here? But I've had so many atemporal experiences that they've become commonplace in a way.
Harriet and I had not communicated for many years, and so we trade emails, and these little things come up all the time. These little amazing coincidences or synchronicities or precognitions. But the most recent one was that there was a crop circle seen. There's a crop circle in Michigan right now. But she dreamed about it 3 weeks ago. And then there's the thing with Kenny and I having the same dream. We've had the same dream about Bigfoot changing into a dog. That happened last week.
Those are countless. I mean, just synchronicity starts showing up. I think it's always there, happening all the time. It's just our minds become so busy and so occupied with just day-to-day reality that we really miss out on the opportunity. And I think what I've learned from someone who has a tremendous amount of energy and has been on a lot of different places and done a lot of different professions and things is that you can slow down the mind in the midst of all these things. And I think that's when the beauty and the helping hands of synchronicity show up all the time. But I don't know, again, I think it just comes down to somewhere in your life getting an opportunity to learn a few techniques, a few basic truths about ourselves to slow down, and I think that's when it really gets to be fun, it gets to be rich. And then the synchronicities are just something you just laugh at and you just let them go, because it's endless.
Well, you can also reframe them and see them differently too. They're not just synchronicities happening out there, they're actually precognitions.
Right.
It's a precognitive system. And I wrote back to Harriet and I said, precognition is probably the most important tool for the future of humanity and raising consciousness. So people realize that they can use it as a tool and on a daily basis, it'll change everything.
Yeah. I just wonder, I mean, there seems to be like a huge need to just get people to slow down. They have such agitated minds. They're always feeding their senses. They're always listening to music, or they get up and they go to the movie, or they go pick up a book, or they go get something to eat, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And I ran into a guy. I was sitting out in a park in Deception Pass yesterday morning, and a guy walked up to me early in the morning when I was sitting on a rock, and he goes, do you do meditation? And I said, well, yes, I do. And then he just proceeded to tell me the lamentations of his life. His wife was getting larger every day. She was totally addicted to consumption, whether it be food or possessions, and that she was spending $4,000 to $5,000 a month on the credit cards, and things were just going to hell in a handbasket. And I said, well, you have a choice in this. You are responsible that you brought these children into the world, so you're responsible for that, but you're also responsible to truth, and no matter what happens, where you find yourself, that's where you're starting from. And just basically said, hey, you're responsible for this too. You need to find your part in this. But I don't know, so it seems to be precognition. I think there's some simple solutions, simple things we need to get over first. Cut the credit cards up. But yet, yes, I do think, but I think our lives need to become, we had talked once before about the chakras of the body and healing, and that it's not always a blockage, a constriction. Sometimes we're so diffused by our addictions and the things that we have to take to keep ourselves in an escape mode by feeding. In this particular person we were talking about, it was like caffeine, alcohol, and food, all down in the control center, down in the colon, and just that diffuseness really prevents any of, again, what we talked about, the snakes, the coiling snakes, the ascending, descending snakes of Kundalini. It really prevents that from moving up. It is blocked in a sense, but not by a denial, but by a over diffusion, and I think that's a problem. But so I think precognition and a lot of these things are valuable in certain times of our life. I wouldn't want to diminish them. If I was to use precognition, which I do use now, I get little hints and just little glimmers. And sometimes they come so many times in a row, and they're like little episodes that are letting me know, like, hey, this is about to check in. And that makes me tune into a bigger migration, maybe a larger wavelength in my life, and I kind of go, let's stop for a while. And that's usually when I'll check out of getting so busy and so inundated with things that I'll pull aside and try to get a glimpse of what's coming my way. But I don't know, I think we have so much there's so many sensations as human beings that we could delve into and take full advantage of. But I think we have to take care of be mindful of the things that we use to distract ourselves from our lives. And I think, unfortunately, most people don't truly enjoy life, don't truly enjoy the richness of it all. And I think that's unfortunate. and also detrimental to all of us, including the land we live on.
So here's a shot of what used to be the creek, and right now you can see that it's a car parking lot for looks like a dealer. Okay, we have found the creek that runs underneath Northgate Mall. It's pretty difficult to find. It looks like the mall has been graded a certain way that is the opposite of the natural flow of the land, so it's sort of on the wrong side of the mall here. But I mean, we're actually on the southeast corner.
Probably one last funny story of synchronicity. I go to Costa Rica a lot, and I stay with some friends of mine, run a lodge there, and his name is Phil. And his parents live in Florida. And I was coming back from the West Coast, and just something inside said, you know, take the time, drop down into Big Bend. And when I had been back down to Costa Rica, just maybe 8 months prior to that, someone had wrecked one of Phil's motorcycles, and he thought it was me. And so he was really upset, and I really wanted to go back down to Costa Rica, but I knew that things just weren't cool between us, and I tried to straighten it out, but it just didn't seem to work. And so at the last moment, I made a hard turn off the freeway and started heading down towards Big Bend National Park. And the whole time I was thinking, God, I need to take care of this situation. This is just bugging me. And so normally I stop in at the ranger station and pay my permit, and then head straight to the natural hot springs outside and sit there. So this time I just decided to skip the paying for my permit and drove straight to the hot springs and then hiked back down to it and was sitting in it. And I had the whole place to myself, and then an older couple showed up, and they said, "Oh, is this the hot springs?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." And they said, "Well, we didn't bring our bathing suits, so do you mind if we get in our underwear?" And I said, "Well, I didn't care. They got in butt naked." And so they proceeded to strip down to their underwear and get in the hot springs. And we started talking, and where are you from? And I told them, and I said, I've been traveling for a while. And she said, do you do almost all your travel in the States? I said, no, I go down to Central America a lot. And they said, oh, really? Where? I said, well, I go to Costa Rica a fair amount. And what part of Costa Rica? Well, I go down to down there, a little town near Puerto Jimenez, the Osa Peninsula. And she goes, oh, that's interesting. Our son, and I immediately stopped before she said anything. I said, are you Phil's mother? And she goes, yes, I am. I said, this is just too bizarre. I said, because I was just thinking about Phil the whole way down in here, driving into the park. And I said, I was heading back from California. And she goes, we're heading to California. And so I began to tell them that something inside said, turn here, go down here. And that was the topic on mine. And they actually weren't going to stop in Big Bend either. They were on their way to California, and they decided, no, let's just go ahead and let's stop in and see this place. And they opted not to pay the permit either first to check in, but decided to go straight to the hot tubs. And so we made it back to their campground. It turned out I ended up camping next door to them in one of the campgrounds, unbeknownst to either one of us. And we got into their RV and took a digital snapshot of the three of us actually sitting in the hot springs, and emailed it down to Phil in Costa Rica. So that's one of those geographical, it's not just me getting it, other people are getting it too, so that's kind of fun.
Did that help make up with Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. It made us all laugh like crazy.
Fair enough. So here we're looking at the creek. Beautiful waters. This is a beautiful little creek. This might be a good place to point out that when Harriet doused this Northgate Mall, all I did was I told her basically where it was along the interstate, and she looked it up on a Yahoo map on the computer, couldn't get a read, and basically she's come to the conclusion that any electronic map won't work because the signals from the hardware screw up the signal. She can only look at a paper map, and or nothing. She says or nothing. Just thinking about where it might be and not even looking at a map works better than working with an electronic map.
So I think in digitizing something like that, it's just far too It doesn't have that analog, doesn't have that biorhythm to it. And I think that's why it gets just too flattened out. It gets translated. It changes dimensions. I think that's why it doesn't work.
That's how I felt when I was working as a surveyor and we went with computer drawings instead of real drawings. I felt like it destroyed the process. I didn't know why. It just felt like, hey, this isn't drawing anymore. Here we have a real Northwest blueberry. I've always been drawn to Seattle Center, and oftentimes when I'm drawn to a place, it turns out to have some connection to the Mothman phenomenon. And I would say that some of these drawings that I'm finding around Seattle Center seem to hearken back to the flying head of Native American lore. The flying head comes up in lots of stories, and it actually is the Mothman. As we contemplate the New York City blackout that was predicted back in 1967, which just happened a couple of days ago here in August of 2003, we see these images drawn all around the Seattle Center area. This looks a lot like the Mothman drawing that was on the door of 905 East Pine. Wasn't there another one back here?
I don't know what that's supposed to be.
Now, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with drawing this same kind of image. I drew a skull face with a sheet over it. It was like from a Abbott and Costello movie, I think, was where I got the idea. But I was really into this thing, and I even had a cartoon series that I drew. It looked just like this.
About this.
Actually, I should have said I was drawn to this. I've always been drawn to the Space Needle. Not Seattle Center, but the Space Needle. And it's around the Space Needle that we find these flying heads, or pseudo-Mothman. I've just come to realize myself that the Space Needle area is perhaps a window area, usually just because intuitively I'm drawn to them time and time again to take photos. And as we were here, noticing these flying head drawings, we ran across some strange writings. Another thing that you often find at these spots, and I just envision people that maybe are mentally unstable, probably unstable because they have these psychic connections to the phenomenon and perhaps can't deal with it, and it tends to make them want to, write graffiti and just to cleanse themselves of the demons, so to speak, to get it out. Here's some of the phrases we find that remind me of the Men in Black. Here's a phrase that if you were being visited by Men in Black, what a child might say. A lot of the flying head drawings are on the building that says amp, of course, an electrical term. Here we have the double flying head, a rare diagram. Here we are, August 22nd, 2003, heading toward Mount Duckabush to do our Heyoka ceremony.
Hey, Hoodie.
And also call forth the Bigfoot. I've got the ritual. The details of the ritual are found in this book, Psychic Sasquatch. Here's the. They actually have the Standing Elk has given the author of this book the actual Sioux ritual for calling forth the Bigfoot. Is it Sioux? Lakota, same thing, yeah.
Lakota.
Calling forth the Bigfoot. We're going to try to also work in a version of the Sioux Heyoka-ing ceremony, what I call the Heyoka ceremony, where the influences, the subtle energetic influences of the Mothman are taken back off of the Heyoka, so that the Heyoka can control the impulse to bring reversal to processes and bringing profanity into the sacred sphere. Craig wanted me to explain that a little more. So it's like once you're in Heyoka, you in any process that you might go through in life, what a job or situation, a vacation, whatever. The Mothman, because it's a paranormal event, it brings the person's consciousness to the realization that anything that's supposed to be sacred probably has a hidden side that's not being seen.
Okay.
That is profane. That in fact it is in fact not appropriate to grasp too much to any particular way of thinking or being. The ultimate survival tool to always remain fluid, I think. Your question?
So it sounds like just by seeing the Mothman, then it makes you realize your Heyoka-ness. So you already understand that the sacred is the profane. So this ritual is to bring forth the profane into the sacred, but you already know that it's there. I don't.
Well, the question you're asking is actually one that I was asking myself about that. I too was wondering, when I found out that there was such a ceremony, I'm like, well, why would you need that?
Yeah.
But for some reason, the Sioux have it. And I guess they felt
Just
like...
another reason to drink beer.
Maybe. I guess they felt like that 2 or 3 years was long enough. And that I'm not sure that it changes you back to what you were. I think it was a taking away of the impulse to do it. That's the best description I can come up with, is that it somehow gives you a little more control over it, because I would have to say that once you become an Heyoka, if it's not recognized in the culture,
right,
it is seen as something aberrant instead of, as the natives would think, it's a necessary thing, and they honor it. So I think they're probably taking it back for a reason, for their reason, which is probably that the person would start to feel, the Heyoka would start to feel privileged, too privileged after a while. Of course, in our culture, it's different. You're seen as aberrant, so so maybe there's a reason to do it there, which would be just to so that you wouldn't have to feel aberrant anymore. But I think you'd still have the knowledge that the sacred and the profane were both there, or needed to be there, and that nothing was too sacred. I think you'd still know that, but you wouldn't feel, it would be a feeling, an emotional thing. You wouldn't feel like you were wrong, and you wouldn't feel so misunderstood.
It's the catch a grip asshole dance.
Asshole dance.
Well, if they're gonna be, if the ritual will bring someone back from some somewhat exalted state or a privileged state, then that's what it is. It's like, whack, come on back.
If that's what it is, I don't know. I just think it's hard to compare a ritual that's been made for a native culture and then apply the same ritual to a Westerner, and whether or not that all works. We're sort of going on our gut feelings here. That's one of the reasons why I'm emphasizing in this trip. I'm emphasizing the Bigfoot ritual even more than the Heyoka. I think with the Heyoka, what I'm going to do is just be conscious of the 4 elements when I'm there, and feel grounded, feel the wind, just experience it. Be aware that I'm doing it for the reason of controlling the Heyoka-ness or whatever those emotions are that have to do with being seen improperly.
Mm-hmm.
Educating yourself and educating others at the same time, probably. Coming to understand the situation more fully. I would say that the Heyoka ceremony, since in the native culture it's for the person who's the Heyoka, I would say that the reversal here occurs in that the Heyoka is doing the ceremony for the culture. I would say that what I'm trying to do with this ceremony is is for myself and for my culture, which needs more knowledge of the Heyoka, more knowledge of the Thunderbird, the Garuda, the Mothman, to remember what those symbols stand for and to integrate that into the culture. I think that's the reason why we're seeing the Mothman so much and the Garuda so much. And there's a resurgence of the Thunderbird cult, if you want to call it, or line of spirituality in Native American thought too. We are here at the Promised Land Park. We've reached the Promised Land. Craig and I were just talking about the trauma, and how when a trauma comes down, it's like a knife splitting an object, and that object is the person, and the split occurs, and then the split becomes obvious to others. So a person who's had a trauma may often have polarities that seem really obvious. In this case, we were talking about a person who was a powerful career woman, or was trying to be, yet was inside, on the other side of it, felt unloved and unaccepted, that sort of thing. And society sort of is broken into levels in which there are certain tools available for people to use to reintegrate the trauma, and others don't have those tools. But hopefully, having some sort of tools available, the person can bring the traumas back together, and the cleavage disappears, and the polarity disappears, and the person, as Craig said, just becomes a normal person. But an example came to mind of a person that I worked on recently, a person who had a sinus, an infection behind their eye, in between the eye and the brain, and had gone almost a year now seeing doctors and spending thousands of dollars, and modern medicine had come up with nothing for her. I mean, there was there was nothing they could do. Antibiotics kind of worked, but it kept coming back, and this just illustrates the power of ancient medicine, is that when I just spent 5 minutes with her, and I could just sense that the blood wasn't flowing to this part of her brain, and that I suggested that that's probably caused by, because blood represents awareness, there's probably a part of her mind that she's not aware of, or maybe a trauma occurred and there's something she's repressing, or something in her life she's not dealing with, and she looked to that side of her head, and she thought, and I could see that the answer popped into her brain. It was like she knew what I was talking about, and she didn't have to tell me what it was, but she knew, and I could, and because she was willing to look at that, I knew that she had the willingness to heal herself. I felt really confident at that moment, and I said, you're going to get better, but just in case, I want to do this really quick body talk thing where you just hold the person's head and tap. It takes a couple of minutes. And I just knew it was going to work, and I just got an email that it's been gone for 3 weeks, and it's the first time in a year she's not had it, and it's just amazing. But that is the kind of tool I'm talking about, that kind of simple tool that's been handed down through the ages. It's based on how the mind works. It came down from an understanding of the mind, and how awareness works, and it just honors that and recognizes that, and that each person has the ability simply to just become aware of their body at that moment, and scan it and find it, and start the healing process at that moment. And I'm hoping, I get a sense that the Mothman phenomenon is about that. It's about having more people out there remembering the ancient ways and keeping them alive, and healing humanity. Craig's watch rings out the time. But the time is now, and the valley is there. Here's the valley. This is the southern end of the Enchanted Valley, the home of the Skookum, or Bigfoot, who guard the Enchanted Valley. Now, the Enchanted Valley is a real physical place, as it is so named in the Olympic National Park. But of course, it's named that because it is really enchanted, and there's another dimension going on there at the same time. So we know we've got Bigfoot up here guarding that other dimension, and if you simply look at it, you can see what I mean. You can just feel the Bigfoots up there. We're now heading up the Enchanted Valley Road. Soon we'll be off the trail and into the Enchanted Valley proper. Okay, we are here at the entrance to the Enchanted Valley, and we are here to honor the Skookum, the Bigfoot, make an offering to them and their wisdom, and also to do an Heyoka ceremony where the Heyoka does a ceremony for the world. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make an offering to each of the directions, one with my arms spread out, which represents the thunder aspect of the Garuda, or Mothman, or Thunderbird. And it represents the creation of sound, or the creation of light with sound. And that goes to each of the directions. And then we do that to all the directions, starting alternatively. So we actually do 16 that way. Then we do 16 with the arms wrapped like this, representing the lightning aspect of the Garuda, which is the use of light to create sound. Third one involves, you'll see it, it involves the Heyoka, and the Heyoka actually represents if you lump light and sound together, they form a positive charge, you might say, or form, and the Heyoka represents the void, the underside, the reverse. But the void is from where creation initially comes from, and then the light appears within that. So it represents the undergirding of the universe. It's like a key going in a lock. So this transfer of the image of the spinning in the directions to the spinal column is actually a way for a person to control a thought form, the creation of a thought form, and that's its importance, because then you can use the thought forms. We actually make them every day in creating our own reality, but it allows you more control of the thought forms and more awareness of the internal state. To the sun in the west. To the sun to the north. Sun to the east. To the sun south. To the thunder to the west. Thunder. 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 South. An absolutely perfect ending to the ritual there. I actually did it backwards, and it was totally unconscious, but that's the way it should be performed. Heyoka, Heyoka, Heyoka. Heyoka, Heyoka, Heyoka. Well, Skookum. Skookum. We ask that you allow us to share in your land. We thank you. Well, Skookum. Heyoka. Heyoka. O great white grandfather, come in peace. There is a similarity between Mothman and the Braxton County Monster. And we have a Texan with us who has actually experienced the red eyes by themselves, devoid of a body. You don't really need the Mothman or the Braxton County Monster to experience the red eyes of the universe. And you don't have to be in West Virginia. You can be in Texas. I bring you Craig Knebel, who will now tell us about his experience with those red eyes. Craig?
Yes, sir.
Didn't you have an experience where you woke up in the middle of the night and the red eyes were there in the room with you?
Yeah, I sure did. It was back in the mid-'80s. I seem to remember an apartment that I was living in. And nothing like this had certainly ever happened in that apartment before. I was just sleeping one night, and Lord, I don't know what time of the early morning it was, probably 3, 4 o'clock, something like that. And all of a sudden I remember kind of coming out of the sleepless state, but I was in some sort of in-between state, I think. And all of a sudden my eyes opened and I looked up and I looked towards the door into the bedroom, and there, just floating in the hallway just beyond, were 2 red dots that were just, dots of light. Dots, they weren't dots like very small. They were, maybe they would have been, 2 inches in diameter each, but, maybe 15 feet away from me. And they were just sort of hovering there in the doorway, going up and down slightly. And I was just trying to process what this could possibly be. There was a thermostat for the HVAC system in there that was, sort of over in that area, and it did have a light on it, a very small, tiny light, but it wasn't 2, and it was much smaller than these were. So I was just trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and all of a sudden, just this wave of terror came over me, and the whole bed started vibrating and started shaking. It was just, I don't know if it was the bed or if it was just me, but everything just started, vibrating with this really kind of deep frequency to it, like that. And I was just shitting in my pants, and it just, the feeling came more and more and more upon me, the vibration, and I was trying to make some sense of it, and I was trying to get my brain out of whatever state that it was in, and I was just struggling, just going, there's red eyes over there, and nothing makes sense, what's going on? And then I was trying to wake myself up, and I was just and I was just like almost there, and then all of a sudden it like overwhelmed me, and boom, I was down and out. And I woke up the next morning, and I asked the gal who was living there at that time whether she felt anything, or whether and I don't believe that she did. For some reason, it just like came on me. It was incredibly strong emotion and experience, and then when I got up the next day, I just was like, just suppressed it. Moving on. Too much stimulus. Makes no sense.
The other thing I remember that you were telling me, Craig, was that you had an experience at the Grand Canyon. Now, when I was recently in the Grand Canyon, I had a vision of the 3 men who had been murdered there, as well as I had an experience where I dipped myself in the water so long that I got close to death, I think, and appeared in Harriet's kitchen, an astral projection of me. I was actually trying to do it, and it worked. So I'd like to hear about your experience there, because it seems like the Grand Canyon has a special power, to it that makes these sort of things happen.
Well, I think the canyon does have a special power to it. I would, the experience that I had, I would just, I would chalk up to the power of the canyon itself. And it was all sort of body sensations. There wasn't any vision or images or anything like that. And so as I reflect on it, I think it's just a damn powerful place to be, and it's bound to affect you on other levels other than just looking at it. And so the experience I had is I was there camping with some friends, and it got to be dark, and I said, hey, let's go down to the canyon, and let's go to the canyon's edge. We're camped at the North Rib, so you could walk right over from the campground. You could walk maybe a quarter mile, and you'd be at the rim of the canyon, and boom, it's dropping down like 1,500, 2,000 feet at that point in time. At that place, and so I decided it would be really cool to go walk through the forest and go over to the ledge at nighttime. And so we took off, and we were making our way through the forest, and you could hear, the closer you got to the canyon, you could hear a rumbling sound, much like the rumbling of this river here. Only it wasn't the river; it was actually the canyon, and it was as it cools down at night, the wind rushes in from the forest up above and gets sucked over the edge down into the bottom by, I guess, a reverse convection current. And so as I was getting closer and closer you got, the louder that sound became, and then you could start to, it was like this, all the wind everywhere was blowing from behind you towards the canyon edge. So the closer you got to the canyon edge, the louder it was getting, and more sensory input, and the more the wind was blowing from behind you. And we just had little tiny flashlights, and so it was really starting to rumble and roar by this time, the closer and closer we got. And I could sense that I had come out of the forest, but it was pitch black, and you couldn't really see anything. And we just had these tiny flashlights, and so you would shine the flashlight on the ground, and all of a sudden, boom, it would just disappear, and you knew that's like where the canyon's edge was. And once I became aware of my proximity to the thing, and all of the wind and the sound and everything just coming over me, I freaked. It just overcame me. The whole thing just overcame me. Legs went weak, and I just flopped down, hands and knees on the ground, just tried to take it in. I really felt compelled to jump. I just felt compelled to run to the edge and throw myself over. And I realized that was probably not the appropriate approach to take, but it was just that just the culmination of the wind. It was like this force, the force of the canyon was, pulling you from behind, and then there was also something just beckoning you to give into it, to go over to the edge. And it just welled up on me, and I was there for a few minutes on my hands and knees, and then it just became too much, and I just dropped down, just like prone on the ground, and spread my arms and my legs out as wide as I could, just to get as firm on the ground as possible. And I just laid there, I don't know how long, and I called over to my buddies, and just said, I can't move. It was big. It was just a big thing. It wasn't negative in any way. I wasn't filled with dread, there was a certain amount of terror associated with it, but I was, able to sort of keep a balance to what was going on. But big energy there for sure.
Are there any other events that you haven't told me about like that?
I don't think so. Not of a real paranormal nature. Could talk about dreams.
What about your dad's experience where he almost died and he saw the 3 shaman?
Well, I don't.
Enigmatic three shaman.
Yeah, yeah.
Well-known three shaman.
He wasn't. Well, that's what I
The
hear.
all-popular,
Yeah.
ever-popular three shaman.
That's right. Brought to you by Nabisco. Where was he? He was down in La Paz, I think. They had gone to the Galapagos, and they were traveling through La Paz on a stayover or something. And he was in a hotel, and he does have heart. What's it called? Fibrillation. So his heart does become erratic from time to time, and so when he was in this hotel in La Paz, he was laying there, and I believe he was woken up by his heart was not beating appropriately, and it revs up. It was going really fast on him, and so I believe that he said that he was sitting there, trying to decide what to do about that, and because it had happened before, maybe not to this intensity, something. He was definitely concerned about it, and he looked up and he said there on the ceiling, as plain as day, were 3 shaman, of the 3 Incan shaman. That's right. And when he told the tale, he described the faces and the hats and everything that they were wearing. I can't bring that back from memory, but my memory is that. And he told you too, Andy, I think that he said that they didn't say anything. They were just up there looking down at him. And, then my dad, being the stoic, real-world sort of guy, just went back to bed. His heart calmed down, and the shaman vaporized, and, he just kind of said, well, wasn't that something? And went back to sleep. So,
An appropriate response, I would say. Yeah. By the way, I happen to have my 3 shamans hat with me today. Craig will now read a message from Standing Elk on the wisdom of the Sasquatch.
Wisdom from Sasquatch by Standing Elk, Lakota spiritual leader. Bigfoot has played a major role in our spiritual system. The medicine men, spiritual men and women, and many other members from different tribes, they've all experienced its presence. It is always an important event around the communities. The stories are always shared around the campfire. The red man's smoke signals travel with the law of light and thought when the subject of the Bigfoot is in the air. Dreaming was my first experience with Bigfoot. He was there, but I couldn't see him. The second experience was also a dream in which he materialized. The third experience was visual near Durango, Colorado. The fourth experience was a spiritual vision during a vision quest. The fifth was one in which he appeared as a pure white being with a message for all. Ho, relatives! Sasquatchitan, I am chief of Sasquatchy peoples. I am one called Bigfoot Yeti, abominable snowman. I am known to the indigenous peoples of Mother Earth as Sihatanka. I live within the 4th and 5th dimension frequencies, and I sit with star nations in higher realms with the Council of 22. I have been a part of your existence beyond your light and beyond the beginnings of what you know as time. I honor all universal and spiritual laws of this universe, and many that are seen and unseen within and without. I am one with Unsi, Iktomi, and Gautama Buddha. We are the guardians of the universal law of innocence, truth, and family. Innocence is the true mind of all that is created. Truth is the path of silence in all that is. Family is the purified spark of love that has allowed Mother Earth to protect all that live within her sacred realms. We have lived with the two-leggeds for millennia until they separated themselves from creation. We are one of many two-legged nations that did not agree with their separation at that time. The universal law of symmetry was broken. The four-leggeds, the wingeds, the ones that swim, the ones that crawl, the plants and the elementals were separated only in the mind's eye of the two-leggeds. Sasquatchy loves two-leggeds because they are spiritual brothers and sisters, and we are committed to help them to return to sacred responsibility. Your three-dimensional realities are very primitive to us. We respect your Mother Earth frequencies, and we haven't forgotten those realities that you've struggled to survive in. We cannot and will not allow ourselves to descend down your realities. It will upset the natural order of balance that is within. We have shown ourselves briefly to many brothers and sisters when they have been pure in heart and mind. This was designed to help them in awakening their DNA to their sacred relationship. We will come to teach you innocence, truth, purity. When you call upon us, we ask first that you purify yourself spiritually, physically, mentally, and emotionally. The indigenous brothers and sisters of this turtle island know ceremonies that will help you balance yourself for this contact. The indigenous peoples of Mother Earth have held on to sacred thoughts produced by elements of earth, fire, water, and air. These elements are sacred essences of their spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental existence. The indigenous peoples were given the sacred gifts and instructions to help you in this effort. The first rite is that of thought purification. We ask you first to be sincere in your thoughts and in your actions. 4 days are required to prepare you for earth, water, fire, and wind purification. Bury yourself in earth for 1 day. Pray, and you will be cleansed. Stand with the water of life for 1 day. Pray, and you will be cleansed. Sit with grandfather's son for 1 day. Pray, and you will be cleansed. Stand with the grandfather wind for 1 day. Pray, and you will be cleansed. When you have purified your thought, then we will join you through the sacred law, the law of true heart. Go to the sweat lodge to attain purity and utilize the sacred waters and sacred breath of your grandfathers. Remember your youth, and you will remember your innocence. Learn the truth by controlling your tongue. Learn from the soil and stone. Learn from the river and ocean. Learn from the fire and lightning. Learn from wind and breath. These are my instructions for your balance with Mother Earth. If you follow these disciplines that have been gifted you through the universal and spiritual laws of Creator, then your lifeline will be unbroken, as ours has been from the beginning. I am Sasquatcheton, Mitakui Oyasin.
Last night, Craig said that he heard rustling in the camp. And this morning, he's drawing what he says is a tree, but it looks like Mothman. One of the things that I notice about his drawing is that as you look closely at the central stem, it has the spinning quality to it, sort of like the diamond wheel that we were doing yesterday. I think it sounds like Craig has actually finished his drawing. So you mentioned just now that you thought that this was a Mothman totem?
Well, it certainly looks like one to me. It's just a found object from nature, transformed through whatever filters were pre-built in me to render that.
At what point did you realize that it might be a Mothman totem?
Oh, well, it's definitely a totem. It's
At what point did you realize that?
I guess when it finished.
Really?
When I looked
so
at it.
When you began, it was sort of an unconscious thing.
Well, it was
unconscious.
You know, it was a riff on what was provided from, what was provided on site, what was provided from nature.
It sounds like an oscillation was set up, vibration was set up between you and the Mothman energies that we called on last night when we did our ceremony, and it was through your drawing that they made themselves manifest this morning.
What do you think of that concept? Because you were unconscious of it. That's the key to me, is that when you started it, you weren't conscious of it being a Mothman type image, and it sort of came into you through the feedback that you were getting with the tree.
Craig was just talking about his process and how he's mainly concerned with lights and darks as he's doing it in technique, and which is the same for me in photography. And that's fine, because when your mind is occupied by those, while your conscious mind is occupied with those, your unconscious can then come forth and help with what kind of thing you're drawing, or the spirit behind it. In this case, I noticed the shadows. Look at this. You've got these shadow images that are basically, you can almost call them astral projections of the object, and this is a key, I think, and that's what makes this drawing a Mothman type drawing. The Mothman represents the shadow self, and so does the Bigfoot. Bigfoot represents the wild man, the shadow self, the side of us that we have to repress in order to have a society. And the reason that these images manifest to us is because it's a working out of these unconscious urges that we're constantly suppressing. And depending on the amount of lack of integration, actually I think it's a lack of integration in some people that causes them to have a vision in the first place. They're so polarized that an unconscious urge has to be manifested out here for the person to recognize it.
And maybe these are my visions.
No, I'm not saying that
you're.
I'm not saying you're in that category at all. No, I'm talking about someone who has a UFO experience out there, and I'm not talking about someone who's doing an artwork. I'm talking about an experience someone has. Like for me, I think when I saw the shadow being that I've referred to many times, that I was at an age, I was like 14, and I probably had a lot of unconscious things going on that I wasn't aware of, and that was a way for me to confront my own fears. Another example is yesterday I shot some sunlight. I noticed that on the playback that there were these little juttings, little balls of light that were refracting out into the lens. And this is a manifestation of nature too. This is what light does when it goes through something, and it splits off into these little balls. Now, these little balls of light are seen in people's homes when they have these kinds of experiences, these otherworldly experiences. And I think it's the same kind of thing happening with the mind. As the light of consciousness goes through the mind, it refracts and breaks off into balls, and then the person can literally manifest balls in their room. And it's just energy working itself out, and you can see it in the physical world when you just film things and just transfer that same idea to the way the mind works. Right. Since 90% of our makeup is unconscious, our mental makeup, or more, we have large areas of ourselves that we don't understand. We don't understand our motivations. We don't understand where the emotions come from, and so forth. I think this phenomenon has to do with a person going from, say, 90% unconscious to 89.5%. unconscious. They've made a small incremental step toward becoming more conscious, and an image will appear at that time, an image of something perhaps otherworldly. And these images the reverse can happen too, which is the person sees the image and then they make an incremental step in becoming a little more conscious of themselves. Each time an artist makes an image, it's an even smaller little incremental step that occurs as the person makes the image, and that untaps a little bit more of their unconscious. Same with the shaman who tells a story to start the healing process. And one could almost say that in any endeavor where power is being used or energy is being used to produce something, there is the repetition of a story, or a building of a story, or a building of a set of words, sounds, images that in the act of preparing them, perhaps going over them a few times, memorizing the story, remembering why the story is important, that generates a field of power, which then can be utilized for different things. As the traveler goes through life and oscillates between being the observer, I am observing my life, to being caught up in an emotion or an event or a life situation, oscillating back and forth continually. At some point, when they've reached a certain age, they stop oscillating and they fly off and they're gone. Okay, we have our third bird incident in the Mothman story since it started last year. The first one was the Grand Canyon, and the bird that landed on the raft after I asked it to come to our raft. And then the other was at the McVeigh execution. A bird came down and landed on this lady's shoulder while we were doing the prayer. Then today, I was sitting here doing the recommended 2 or 3 times a day. You're supposed to, when you come into the Enchanted Valley, you're supposed to ask the Sasquatchy peoples, for permit. Well, not really for permission, but you just say, "I have come in peace." And at the very instant that I thought that thought and remembered that I need to ask it, a bird flew by, and we haven't seen any birds today. I haven't seen one bird. This is the first bird. It flies by at the exact time, and Craig starts whistling, trying to call it to us. And as it is pointed out in the literature, the birds are the emissaries of the Sasquatch. They report back to the Sasquatch on things that go on in the forest, which is why the Mothman is a half bird, half man. And it explains the connection between the Mothman and the Bigfoot. This is why you have such an emphasis in Native American culture on the different birds, the raven, the crow, the crane, and so on.
And here is my Vision Quest circle, where I will be staying for the next 4 days.
The water here has an unreal blue color to it, turquoise, and that log, it just appears to glow. And so I faced in that direction, and I again meditated and said, "Sasquatchy peoples, I come in peace." And I started trying to listen for answers in my head, and sure enough, I started getting very clear answers, as if from my subconscious. And so I asked how things are going to be for me in the future as I endeavor on my path, and the answer was, well, you want to do the right thing, and so the world will welcome you. And the Sasquatch said, "You're welcome, be at peace," and they also said that they were protectors that my dad told Harriet of from the other side. I was telling Craig of the stories of how once you've made contact with the Sasquatchy peoples, they will sometimes show up to heal you and help you in times of trouble. It's interesting. I think that Sasquatch is simply a representation of what it's like to speak to your unconscious, because the answers, seem to be coming from somewhere inside of me. But they're coming back in an honest way, just really honest answers. And, it's sort of like being honest with yourself or something. We just ran into a fellow who comes back here year after year to this little spot in the river. It's one of the few left in the northwest where you have cliffs coming down to the water. It's a slot canyon. He said there's lots of cougars and bear and large birds, big black birds, he said. Craig is zoning out at entering the crack in the sink.
Enter the portal!
Last night I had a beautiful dream of meeting with the Sasquatchy. I could sense that they were there and that they were healing me, and working on me, and helping me, and sending good vibes my way. And it appears that my knee pain is gone. I could sense that the Sasquatchy people were close by last night, and we made some sort of contact in the dream state. Sasquatchy peoples, we thank you. Sasquatchy peoples, we thank you for this gift. Heyoka! 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 From the great North Woods, I say, aloha. The end.
Check this out. Watch this. Oh! It's pretty amazing.
It's like
He could do the whole thing. It's pretty amazing.
They're come to get you. It's August 2006. We're here with Mercedes Yaeger at the Pike Market in Seattle, talking about ghosts. She does a ghost tour here, and we're going to be discussing ghosty things. We have the tiles that people come and pray to. The dead people once donated the tiles, money for the tiles.
Andy, do you know this? Do you remember this?
That's great.
Remember that story?
Oh yes, the Heaven's Gate that happened the same day as the James Earl Ray. The Martin Luther King family held a conference that day to say that they thought the government did it. And they used the Heaven's Gate thing to cover it up. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that. That's pretty freaky. Okay, so
go ahead.
no, the area I want to take you to is at the end of this bridge.
Okay. So what do we have? A bridge that goes nowhere?
Yeah, there used to be a structure out here called a municipal market, and it had a parking lot on the top. People would drive their car across the bridge. It was kind of their like advertising ploy for their market. And if you go out there, you can see this parking lot. They've left all the foundation of the building in a couple of levels. Right out this door. And then I'll tell you the story of it, because it's pretty freaky. It's like all of that right over there. Those are a couple of the levels of this building. Do you see that down there? Several levels. Now the building in 1961, they had a fire in the base of the foundation, and the fire caught very quickly, and the building imploded and fell upon itself with people in it. And so this bridge became an escape route for those few people that could get out of this collapse. And what's been really strange is that it seems to be at a certain time, and I don't know the date that it collapsed, and that's what I'm trying to find out. There's not a lot of history around this market, but there's a couple people that have been literally shoved out of the way when they're closing up in this space over here. And it's become this thing lately, like people have been feeling people running by them, and things are being moved a lot. And so I feel like if it happened, it must have happened right around this time, because all of this activity is just starting up very suddenly. Yeah.
So there's a native graveyard across the street?
There's a Native American graveyard right across the street. That's where we're going next.
What do you think about the ghost activity in the market so far?
I can't wait to see more.
I'm looking forward to this Indian graveyard. And we're going to a part of the market that I've always felt weird in back here. This is where the Indian graveyard is. This little corner back here.
Wow, from clear down there, I didn't know right away quick like who it was.
This is the space. I was doing research about the mortuary, which is right up above. You can't see it very well from here. I was doing research about the mortuary, and I stumbled across an article from the Seattle Star in like 1859. Actually, it was a little bit later than that, more like 1880. And in the document, Arthur Denny talks about exhuming the bodies of the first graveyard, which were at 2nd and Stewart, and how he had to publicly apologize because he didn't move all the bodies. And then he also made an announcement that he had found hundreds of cedar caskets in this hillside. Cedar caskets, that was Snohomish and Duckabush graves. So then I got really curious and I started to do more research, and I found out Amongst the Snohomish people, the tradition was to bury the dead on a hillside with a view of water to limit their movement, but also keep them in a place that they could see all of their land. So this hillside where Pike plays, this was at the base of a very big hill, Denny Hill, which was not a graveyard. There was a graveyard at the base of it, our city's graveyard. But then right next to our graveyard was a perfect bluff that you could look out on the water. And that's exactly where he found the cedar graves, which is exactly this hillside right here in the market that's now been constructed over. What's even more interesting is that there is a white plum tree from Japan planted in this courtyard that by all accounts was planted by Princess Angeline, which is Chief Seattle's daughter. It was planted in the 1870s. So that's even more interesting because you wonder why there's this one single tree on this hillside. And then on top of that, the mortuary is situated a block away, which is the most active building in Seattle for hauntings. And what's really interesting about that space is that there are a lot of Native Americans that seem to gather there. There are ghosts from every generation and every era and all manners of dress that gather there. And it's almost like a meeting place. And there's so much activity between this street and up to 2nd and Stewart that all of the buildings along this kind of, if you were to trace where the graveyards were, they all have incredible stories to tell. What I really like too is that this hillside has become a place where people in the market now scatter the ashes of the dead. So it's almost, now it's our graveyard, and there's lots of spirits that are kind of in this space. And then I love that people come back here, and this is where they smoke tobacco. And I've seen, I had one guy from Alaska come, I mean, I didn't know him, I just witnessed him take out a flute, and he started to play back here. And he played this really beautiful little melody, and I asked him why afterwards. And he said, well, I'm Native and Native American, and I feel as though there's something about this hill that I needed to pay honor to, as though my descendants are here. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Let me tell you about this hillside.
So he didn't really know, he just felt
He had no idea. He just felt that there was the presence of many of his people. And then if you go even further into research and you look at the years of 1852 to 1858, in 1852, 14,000 Native Americans lost their lives in 4 months. Smallpox, cholera, influenza, disease. And there's an account, I'm reading this great book that was written in 1904 about this area in 1851. There were hundreds of thousands of Native Americans. And that population dwindled, really, really small. The phone's ringing.
Sorry.
Break.
Hello? Okay.
How many people really did lose their lives during those few years? There were things like the treaty wars in Washington State, where groups of Native Americans banded together and attacked cities. There was a battle in Seattle. The battle in Seattle was a one-day event, and like nobody lost their life, at least on our records. But the Snohomish have a record of 2,000 people losing their lives in this, what was really a massacre. Seattle had brought up a ship from San Francisco, the Decatur, which could fight, and all of the citizens had kind of built an encampment so they could fight this battle.
With the Indians? When
With
you
the
say
Indians.
Seattle, you mean the city of Seattle?
I mean the city of Seattle.
Okay, not Chief.
No, not Chief Seattle. Chief Seattle was really loved by the people of the city. He got the Snohomish and the Duwamish to move over to Snohomish, and he was instrumental in writing the peace treaties after the treaty wars. One, he had seen so many people lose their lives in his own tribe, and so he was protecting his citizens. But there were other chiefs in this area that fought, and they fought bloodily. I mean, there were massacres throughout eastern Washington, especially on the eastern side, western and down into Oregon. I don't know if you know about the Whitman massacre across the way in eastern Washington. Whole encampments of pioneers just slaughtered, and this was all during this time period.
By Indians?
By Indians, yeah. The governor was moving Native Americans onto land that was inhospitable, and oftentimes with rival tribes, like century-old rival tribes that they would fight with, and they would be put on the same land. And so people rebelled, and people got angry, and people fought. So if you think about the numbers that are involved in Seattle's beginning and the number of Native Americans that lost their lives, we know for sure 14,000 in 4 months and 2,000 during the Battle of Seattle. And where were they being buried? When I think of this hill, I think of thousands of people inhabiting this hill. So it's a very sacred place to me. It's also a place of turmoil, a lot of unrest.
Yeah, it seems like if there's been a bad tragedy at a spot, it either creates a field, or the field caused it to begin with. You don't quite know, and they seem to crop up again and again.
Yeah.
Ghosts and
tragedy.
Visions of. You can see a vision of an entity here, even that wouldn't be human, maybe.
Do you know who Linda Hazard is? Have you ever come across that name?
Say.
Linda Hazard. Do you know that name from early Seattle history?
No.
1910, there was a doctor in Seattle. She was a homeopathic doctor. And her brand of homeopathy was to starve people very, very slowly. She'd take months and put them on a diet, restrictive diet, that would get them to the point of just being emaciated, just skin and bones. The mortician who was here at the mortuary actually sued her for the number of bodies she was bringing in. Have you ever heard of this? Yeah. She finally got some attention. There were 2 English sisters that came under her care. One of them died, the other lived. The one that died had left all of her estate, all of her money to Linda Hazard.
Wow.
But Linda Hazard was never tried for murder. She just made lots and lots of money, and finally she built, and this is a really amazing space, you have to go there because it's still there, in Olalla, Washington. There is the sanatorium with the attached crematorium that Linda Hazard built for herself, so she could move out of Seattle and have her own institution and stop facing these legal battles with the local mortician.
I want to kill people slowly, by God, and that's my right.
I deserve to do it. So that's also this is the mortuary where up the street here is where all those starving people came through. And what's interesting about the mortuary is that there have been several restaurants, some have only stayed open a few months, that have not been able to stay open in the space. Interesting, huh?
Interesting. Totally interesting.
And they used to be really friendly with my going up there and bringing my tours there. They're not anymore. They've had people quit. All of a sudden this activity has started in the space. Things are falling, things are breaking, and they don't want to draw attention, not for their customers, but for their workers who are starting to get freaked out. Because the activity builds. Like, a business will come in, be there for a while, nothing will happen, and then slowly little things will start happening, and then really big things will start happening.
And that's just a symptom of our materialistic society, because there's ways to propitiate these spirits, but nobody talks about it or has any knowledge of it anymore.
No. I mean, in this case...
all they can do is be afraid.
Yeah. In this case, one of the easiest things to do in that space would be to make an offering, to create an altar and offer the food that the spirits never got in their life, and to bring them something of sustenance from the time period they lived in. That's how I see it. I just, that's why they're unsettled, because nobody's offering them what they needed so desperately in their life, and yet they're watching all these people eat. So just make an altar and give them some food. And they'll be okay.
Of, all the Asian restaurants do that.
They do. They do.
Well, do we want to go to our next spot?
Do you want to go up to the more...
This thing on. Okay, this is the embalming room where Linda Hazard used to cremate her victims. That's where the restaurant is, where they tend to go out of business.
The street regrading, if you look down, you'll see the lights that used to go down to the level below. This street has been regraded one level up, kind of like the underground in Pioneer Square. So the building we're going to look at now, the mortuary, it was completed in brick and stone in 1904, and that's when the street was also raised. Before that, it was a wood structure. The work on the mortuary, there's a beautiful tile work from 1904, and you'll notice it. It's pretty incredible. It's on the historic registry. It can't be torn down. There's the word chapel. That's the entrance to the chapel. This is where you would attend the funeral, and the funerals were open to the masses, so anyone could attend the funeral. There was standing room space within the main parlor, and then above the standing room space were 2 balconies. On one balcony, the preacher or the mortician would speak to the group that was assembled, and across from that balcony was another balcony where the family would stand or sit. And the dead at that time, in 1904, were viewed sitting up. So they would be sitting, just like the Abraham.
Wait a minute, start over with that.
Oh.
You're saying people were sitting up in position?
Yeah, the dead at that time were you would see the dead sitting up in full clothing, and they would look to be alive. They would sit, and the audience were not offered seats. You would walk through and view the dead.
More than one at once, you mean?
Sure. Oh no, the dead, no, one person at once. But
that was it, huh? So you just cruised by?
You just cruise by.
Stand there?
You'd stand there. Whatever was being said between the preacher or the mortician and the family was on a level above you. So there was this kind of private audience that was above the seated dead. What's cool about the inside of this space is they've opened up the walls to expose the original balconies, so you can see the way they were laid out at that time. But it was a completely different way of relating to the dead than we do today. And they would be left on display, sometimes for several days, depending on their importance.
This is now the Starlight Lounge.
Leave everybody in the market, huh?
East Cemetery was right where the Josephinium is today.
That was the first cemetery in Seattle?
Very first cemetery. I don't know if you know anything about cemeteries
Right
in
over there.
Seattle. They've been moved 4 times. So the first cemetery for the city was here at the base of 2nd and Stewart. There was a large hill behind it. So when they started to regrade that hill, they had to exhume all the bodies. They paid 3 guys $3,000 and gave them, I think, 3 weeks. That's how quickly it was that they had to move hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bodies. They moved these bodies to 5th and Denny, where the 5 Point Cafe is today, right at the base of the Space Needle, Fisher Plaza. There's a statue there for Chief Seattle. It's a fountain in the center. That's the 2nd cemetery.
Did some filming there and took a photo of it.
Did you? That's probably the most haunted lands.
I've been saying all through this documentary that that spot was a power spot, because there's a Thunderbird totem. We found some of the Cold Killer's graffiti and some other weird graffiti there that was just very bizarre and seemed to synchronize with Mothman somehow. And I was just kind of joking, but you're saying that there's a connection to this. It's with the dead bodies. Even.
Yeah, it's the 2nd cemetery. Now this cemetery, when Denny released his statement, he said that they were not able to move all the bodies. Another interesting thing is they dug up the Chinese bodies. There were a lot of Chinese workers in this area starting in the early 1850s, and they supposedly were going to give them back to China, but they never went on any boat or anywhere, so they don't know where those bodies ended up. So then it moved to 5th and Denny. And then from 5th and Denny, they moved to Volunteer Park. And then from Volunteer Park, they moved to Lakeview Cemetery, which is where they're housed today. I mean, our city pioneers are all up there. Some of the graves are empty. 15th and Harrison.
Oh,
that's an amazing cemetery.
That's the one you're calling Lakeview.
That's Lakeview Cemetery.
Okay. The one with Bruce Lee is.
Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee. Now, if you go into their offices and you get a map to show you where all the graves are, some of them have little asterisks. They don't know if the bodies are actually there. So they don't know if they made it the final procession.
Okay, so we're going to look at the Cold Killer, some old Cold Killer here. And what were you saying about the Cold Killer, Ben? That your friends knew him?
No. I'm saying that graffiti artists that were judging the quality of the art were saying it was garbage.
But they didn't understand the story that the Cold Killer was trying to reveal a murder.
Exactly, which I don't even know either until just now.
An unrequited murder, an uninvestigated murder. I mean, you know.
You know where you need to go is to the Wame. These are the keys when you work for the underground tours you get. I use 3 of them. I don't know where the others go.
Seattle has a vast underground because they moved the city up one floor basically and built a new street level. And Mercedes does a bus tour. They actually drive in the streets. No.
I do a bus tour.
It's above ground.
And I do a nighttime adult underground tour. Spiritualism in Seattle. Henry Yesler, our first mayor. He was our mayor 3 times. He had the sawmill down at the end of Yesler. And
that's Skid Row.
That's Skid Road, Yesler's Skid Road. Now Henry Yesler was a spiritualist. He and his wife Sarah practiced this brand of religion that was becoming very popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They say even Abe Lincoln's wife practiced spiritualism.
It ties into Blavatsky and the Nine, the UFO contactees, all of that. There's that same thread running through all of it.
Really? Well, it's interesting because Yesler and Sarah would have great big seances, and one of the things, their lives are really interesting. They think that, Yesler was a very greedy man, and he was. He was a very, very rich man. He employed most of the population of this city. He acted as mayor 3 times, and as mayor, he would, as a private citizen, sue the city and then settle with himself out of court. So he put lots of money in his pocket. He brought the city to the brink of bankruptcy. He had the first lottery. He won the first lottery. Now, Sarah and Henry practiced free love, which was one aspect of spiritualism that was involved here in the West Coast. Not so much in the East Coast, but out here in pioneer territory, free love was a part of spiritualism. So Sarah Yesler took many lovers. Henry Yesler took many lovers. One of them is a Duwamish woman. There was just an article about one of their descendants the other day in the PI. He and this Duwamish Native American woman had a daughter, and that lineage carries on today. And there's a woman that just gained entry into the Duwamish tribe, and she's a Yesler descendant. So it's really interesting that they would have this lineage. And then Sarah Yesler had female lovers, and at the Museum of History and Industry, you can read her letters to all her lovers. So that was one aspect of their brand of spiritualism. But their belief was there really wasn't a heaven or hell. There wasn't consequence to your actions in life. So you could pretty much do anything you wanted to in life. They would hold great seances to speak to the dead and commune with spirits. And that's how you gained audience with God. It was through the spirit world. That's it. That's it.
You got something to say about spiritualism?
Spiritualism, yeah. Listen.
We got about 2 minutes, then we got to run. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right.
I seem nice, but I'm really possessed.
What's that?
Exterminating these snitches, the fucking whip-head ass bitches are leaving niggas in graveyards. I'm tired of digging ditches, hitting the I-5, fed away, hitting my switches. My mama says I'm demonic, having sick with these witches I hit hard and fast. Like Randy just a picture, leaving niggas up in hospital with 89 stitches. I'm the hardcore MC, anticipated. Your mother owe me money, but she got decapitated, left the body in Oregon. Head New York, fed her eyes on my pigs off a pitchfork. Then I cooked the swine so I could taste the pork. Met your motherfucking mother at the end of my fork. No, that's not where it's at. God bless you. Jesus Christ, my Savior. That's for kids.